Okay, friends, I have your magic back pocket recipe for a gluten-free vanilla cake. It is light and fluffy, and most importantly, moist. It doesn't sink in the middle. And let me tell you, I have tested this recipe more than I have ever tested any other dessert recipe. For some reason, chocolate cakes, easy to do. Vanilla cakes, I kept getting a dry crumb, but I fixed that for you, and today I'm gonna show you how. Before you get started, you need to prep some of your ingredients because they need to come to room temperature. Room temperature ingredients just blend together more homogeneously. So since we're doing a pure white vanilla cake, this recipe just uses egg whites, and you need 4 egg whites at room temp. Now here's the thing, you need room temp egg whites, but eggs separate easier when they're cold. So I'm just gonna show you really quick. These are my room temp eggs, but I'm gonna show you how I separate eggs in case you don't know. And you do not need any fancy kitchen utensil, you just use your hands. So get 2 bowls, your yolks will go in and one your whites. And then I'm just gonna open it up, and then I just use my hands and kinda just toss the egg back and forth between my hands until the white releases from the yolk. And then you can either save your yolks and you can freeze them for if you're making like a lemon curd or a hollandaise, or you can get rid of them. So once you have your egg white in the bowl and you make sure there's no yolk in there, then you can transfer that to where your other egg whites are, and then you just kind of start the process again. The reason why we do it one at a time is because we don't want any of the yolk in there, so if it accidentally cracks, then you don't ruin the whole batch of egg whites. Now we're ready to whisk all our liquid ingredients into a bowl. So we have our 4 room temp egg whites. We have 2/3 cup of, I use whole milk, which I recommend. If you do anything less, I wouldn't do anything less than 2% milk, and if you need to use a non-dairy milk, I would use something with a higher fat content. So I believe soy and almond milk, look for the higher the fat content, the better, just because we want to incorporate fat into the recipe so we don't dry out the crumb. Now we have 8 tablespoons of melted and cooled butter, and you want your butter melted but yet cooled because when it hits the other ingredients, you don't want it to solidify up. So you want it to stay in that liquid state. So I want to tell you the melted butter is the secret to getting moist vanilla cakes, because a lot of gluten-free cakes I found, they just take a regular cake recipe and then just swap out gluten-free flour. White traditional cakes have softened butter. That doesn't work with gluten-free cakes because you need something to coat the gluten-free starches better. So the melted butter does a better job of that. So you get a softer crumb. Now that we have all the liquid ingredients, we're gonna move on and mix together the dry ingredients in a stand mixer. So we need 2 cups of gluten-free flour. I use cup for cup gluten-free flour, which I highly recommend for baking recipes. I just like it because it has cornstarch in the mix, which softens the crumb, but weirdly, it also will make your batter a little bit gummier, but it's like a magic trick. Once you bake it, then it's completely fine. You can use another gluten-free flour if you prefer. You will just notice a different consistency in your batter. And then 1 1/4 cup of granulated sugar. And in here we have a tablespoon of baking powder, a 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda, and then a 1/2 teaspoon of salt. And then just combine that on low speed, and then we're ready to add our liquid ingredients. Here's the other trick of how we're gonna perform some magic to make a gluten-free cake taste just as good as your regular wheat flour cake. We are going to mix the bejesus out of it, which doesn't matter because there's no gluten in this recipe, so we can't toughen the crumb. So we're gonna take our liquid ingredients, and I'm gonna pour about 2/3 in, and I'm gonna mix it for 2 minutes until it's nice and pale and fluffy. Okay, and then I'm just going to add the rest of the liquid ingredients, beat it together for about a minute longer, and then your cake batter's done. It's that easy. I like to bake my cakes in 8-inch cake pans, particularly for this recipe, just because it gives a thicker cake layer. You can do it in a 9-inch cake pan as well. I would just cut back on the baking time a little bit and obviously your cake layers will be a little bit thinner. So this is what I mean when you see the batter, you're gonna be like, you're gonna doubt me a little bit. I'm using cup for cup. It has a little bit of a gummier, thicker texture, which is a little tricky to spread, but I'll show you my technique for that. So just split it as best as you can between the two cake pans. To be honest, when I'm doing this for myself, usually I'll use a food scale and I'll weigh my pans and then zero out the weight. And I like to get real precise about my cake layers being even, but you could just eyeball it too. Okay, and then just use your silicone spoon, and normally you could use kind of like an offset spatula and move it around, but the cup for cup is kind of hard to move around. So I just use my silicone spoon and even it out as much as possible. I should mention too that my cake pans have been greased, and then I line the bottom with just a cut to size parchment paper because it makes the cake layers come out way easier when you're done baking. And then just to get everything settled and even, and to release any potential air bubbles that are in there, you could take your cake pans and just drop them on your counter. Okay, last trick. This is what makes all the difference. So I tested this recipe so much because what would happen is I would bake them and they would be gorgeous. They would be perfection, and then they would cool and the cake would sink. I played around with the liquid amount, the dry ingredients amount, with the leavening. I did so many variations of the ingredients, and then I just did this thing where I let the cake batter rest for 15 minutes, and that was the trick. It just gives time for the gluten-free starches to absorb all that moisture, and it helps build the structure of the cake. This also is really good if you're using different gluten-free flours because they're all made up of different gluten-free starches. Unfortunately, there's no universal gluten-free flour. Some starches absorb moisture a lot better than other starches, so it kind of gives these gluten-free flours an even playing field and gives this time for everything to soak up and build up the structure of the cake. So I highly recommend doing this. While this is happening, you could preheat your oven to 350 and then just let it set for 15 minutes. Once that's done, we're gonna bake for about 23 minutes in the oven, 23 to 25. Dial it back a little bit if you're using the 9-inch cake pans, and then I will show you how I test my cake to make sure it's done. For gluten-free cakes, I always err on the side, and for breads for that matter, of slightly over baking. You just want to make sure that that moisture has evaporated so you don't get a sunken middle. This is my cake tester. I like this more than a toothpick because the toothpick doesn't have much surface area. So the tip is black, and then when you insert it, and it turns white if the cake is done. And then I can clearly see that there's no liquid on it, that the cake is done baking. So cool it in the pan for about 5 minutes and then turn it onto the wire racks to cool completely. You want it all the way cool before frosting. If you love a really light, fluffy buttercream frosting that doesn't taste overly sweet or heavy, I have the perfect recipe for you. I will link to it in the description below, and you can find all the tips on how to frost a cake like a pro. It's not hard at all. This is the perfect birthday cake. If you have someone special you need to bake a gluten-free cake for, and you don't want anyone else at the party to know that they're eating a gluten-free cake, this is what you make them. The texture of this cake, I mean, you wouldn't know at all. It is superb. It is light and fluffy, but it is still moist. Oh my gosh, I cannot wait to dig in. It's perfect. It tastes like the cake that I grew up on. You can find the full printable recipe below. And if you find this video helpful and you want to find other gluten-free recipes that you could easily make at home, make sure you subscribe to the channel. It helps me because I get more exposure and visibility, and it helps you because you will never miss a video. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.